The courtroom was packed. A sea of expectant faces filled the wooden benches, some leaning forward in anticipation, others whispering among themselves. The air was thick with tension, charged like the sky before a thunderstorm. At the front of the room, Judge Alden adjusted his thick glasses and cleared his throat. He was a man accustomed to control, to being the final word in every case he presided over. And today would be no different. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "I have reviewed the arguments presented, and frankly, I see little reason to delay my ruling any further." Kimberly sat motionless at the defendant's table, her fingers gripping the edge of her legal pad. Across from her, Raymond Thatcher, the attorney representing the plaintiff, flashed a satisfied smirk. He was a seasoned litigator, the kind who thrived in the gray areas of the law, bending rules just enough to ensure victory. She had seen men like him before, men who believed justice was a privilege for the wealthy, not a right for all. "Your Honor," Kimberly said, her voice steady despite the blatant unfairness of the proceedings, "with all due respect, I have yet to present my final argument." Judge Alden waved a dismissive hand. "Miss Carter, your final argument is unnecessary. The facts are clear, and my ruling will reflect the clarity." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Even some of the spectators, who had expected a fair trial, seemed unsettled by the judge's blatant disregard for due process. Kimberly inhaled deeply. She had known this case would be difficult the moment she agreed to take it. The plaintiff, Mr. Langley, a slumlord with a long history of exploiting tenants, had deep pockets and even deeper connections. When he had served an illegal eviction notice to a struggling black single mother, Kimberly had stepped in to defend her. But what had started as a simple housing dispute had quickly spiraled into something more sinister. Documents had gone missing, witnesses had been threatened, and now the judge himself seemed determined to silence her. Kimberly stood, smoothing her blazer as she met Alden's gaze. "Your Honor," she said, her voice unwavering, "I respectfully request the opportunity to present my final argument. My client has the right to be heard." Alden sighed, rubbing his temples as if she were nothing more than an inconvenience. "Fine. Make it quick." Kimberly turned to the jury, her gaze sweeping across them. "This case is about more than just an eviction notice. It is about power. Who wields it and who suffers beneath it? Mr. Langley owns multiple properties across this city, and time and again, he has used his wealth to push tenants out of their homes, disregarding the law because he believes no one will hold him accountable." Thatcher scoffed, but Kimberly pressed on. "My client, Ms. Lawson, has lived in that apartment for 5 years. She pays her rent. She follows the lease agreement. But when she reported unsafe conditions, broken heating, water damage, and infestation, what did Mr. Langley do? Did he fix the problems? No, he retaliated. He tried to force her out illegally." She paused, letting her words sink in. "If this court allows Mr. Langley to get away with this, what message does that send? That money matters more than justice? That the law bends to those who can afford to twist it?" Judge Alden adjusted his glasses, clearly impatient. "Miss Carter, wrap it up." Kimberly turned back to the judge. "I ask that you uphold the law, Your Honor. I ask that you rule in favor of Miss Lawson." A heavy silence filled the room. Judge Alden leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "You certainly have a way with words, Miss Carter. But unfortunately for you, the law isn't about speeches." He picked up his gavel, his grip tightening around the handle. "In the matter of Langley versus Lawson," he announced, "this court rules in favor of—" A sudden noise from the back of the room made him pause. Kimberly turned, Just as the courtroom doors swung open, a court clerk rushed inside, a file in hand. "Your Honor, I was just handed this new evidence." Alden frowned. "What evidence?" The clerk hesitated, glancing at Kimberly before handing the file to the judge. Alden flipped it open, his expression shifting from annoyance to something colder. Kimberly recognized the name on the document instantly. It was a record, a financial trail connecting Langley to a judge's discretionary fund, Alden's fund. For the first time that day, Judge Alden hesitated. The courtroom watched in silence as he read, his face darkening with every line. Kimberly stepped forward. "Is there something wrong, Your Honor?" she asked, her voice smooth, unshaken. Alden clenched his jaw. "This is highly irregular." "Yet it seems relevant," Kimberly interrupted. "Perhaps we should examine this before you rule." Alden's grip on the gavel tightened. His reputation, his power, his control over this courtroom. It was all being threatened in real time. He knew it, and so did Kimberly. This battle was far from over. A palpable silence gripped the courtroom. The walls, lined with old mahogany panels, seemed to close in, as every eye fixated on Judge Alden. His fingers clenched around the new document, his jaw tightening with each passing second. Kimberly Carter didn't move. She stood tall, her sharp gaze locked onto the judge, watching the subtle tremor in his hands. The paper he held wasn't just evidence. It was a loaded gun, aimed straight at the corruption she had suspected from the moment she stepped into this courtroom. Alden's hesitation spoke volumes. Thatcher, Langley's high-priced attorney, shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his confidence flickering for the first time that day. Even the spectators sensed it. The power dynamic in the room had shifted. Kimberly took a step forward. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady, "would you like to share with the court, what's in that file?" Alden's head snapped up. His nostrils flared slightly, the tension in his shoulders betraying his otherwise controlled demeanor. "This is highly irregular," he muttered. "That may be," Kimberly countered. "But if it has bearing on this case, I believe we all have the right to know." She let the words linger, watching as Alden struggled to compose himself. His years on the bench had conditioned him to maintain order, to project unwavering authority. But for the first time, Kimberly saw something else flash in his eyes: doubt. He exhaled sharply through his nose and slammed the folder shut. "This document is irrelevant," he declared, but his voice lacked the firm conviction it had carried before. Kimberly arched an eyebrow. "That's interesting," she mused, "because from where I'm standing, it looks incredibly relevant." A murmur rippled through the spectators. Even members of the jury, who had been conditioned to remain impartial, exchanged uneasy glances. Kimberly turned to the clerk. "Who delivered this?" The young woman hesitated. "It was an anonymous drop, ma'am, left at the front desk." Alden's expression darkened. He could feel control slipping through his fingers. This wasn't how today was supposed to go. He had anticipated a smooth ruling in Langley's favor, just another minor victory in a system that thrived on power and privilege. But then Kimberly Carter had walked into his courtroom, and now his carefully laid plans were unraveling. "Enough," he barked, his voice echoing sharply against the chamber walls. He lifted the gavel, preparing to end this once and for all. "This court rules in favor of—" "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Judge." The words, cool and deliberate, cut through the room like a blade. Alden's gavel halted midair. Kimberly stepped closer, allowing a slow, knowing smile to form. "You see, Your Honor," she continued, "there's something you don't know about me. Something you should have considered before you tried to silence me." Alden's eyes flickered with irritation. And what, pray tell, is that? Kimberly took a deliberate pause, letting the tension stretch thin before delivering the final blow. I am a federal prosecutor. The courtroom erupted. Gasps and whispers filled the space like wildfire. Spectators turned to one another in disbelief. The reporters in the back scrambled to take notes, their fingers flying across keyboards as they typed furiously. Judge Alden's face drained of color. The arrogance that had once been so palpable was gone, replaced by something much less certain. Thatcher visibly paled, shifting in his seat. Langley, the man who had spent years terrorizing low-income tenants, with his wealth and influence, sat frozen, his grip tightening on the arms of his chair. Kimberly let the revelation sink in before continuing. I have spent the last 7 years prosecuting high-level fraud, corporate corruption, and public misconduct, which means, she glanced pointedly at the folder in Alden's hands. I recognize a paper trail when I see one. Alden swallowed hard. This document, Kimberly gestured to the file, contains financial records linking Mr. Langley's properties to a fund controlled by this very court. A fund that, if I'm not mistaken, falls under your jurisdiction, Judge Alden. Another wave of murmurs flooded the room. Kimberly took her time, letting the weight of her words settle over the courtroom. This case was never about Miss Lawson breaking her lease, she said, turning back to face the jury. It was about power. Mr. Langley believed his wealth could buy him whatever ruling he wanted, and Judge Alden? She pivoted slightly, eyes locking onto him, believed he could sit on that bench, untouched and unchallenged, while bending the law to serve his interests. Alden's fingers curled into fists. Miss Carter, I will not allow this courtroom to become your personal stage for theatrics. Kimberly merely tilted her head. Then, you should have played fair, Your Honor. The silence that followed was deafening. Alden knew he had been cornered. Your Honor, Kimberly continued, her voice carrying an air of finality. Given the potential conflict of interest now at play, I formally request that you recuse yourself from this case. Alden's lips pressed into a thin line. He opened his mouth as if to argue, but before he could, a second voice cut through the tension. She's right. All heads turned. A woman in the front row, an older woman with salt and pepper curls and sharp, intelligent eyes, stood up. Kimberly recognized her instantly. Judge Marissa Holloway, a senior circuit judge. The integrity of this court is now in question, Judge Holloway announced, her gaze cold and unwavering as it met Alden's. Given Miss Carter's allegations and the evidence presented, I will personally request an internal review of this matter. Alden's face twisted, but he knew there was nothing he could say to undo the damage. Kimberly didn't smile. She simply folded her arms and nodded once. Game over. For now. The courtroom was left in stunned silence as Judge Alden struggled to maintain his composure. The man who had once wielded absolute power over his courtroom now looked like a king watching his empire crumble. Kimberly turned back to Ms. Lawson, her client. The woman sat wide-eyed, gripping her hands together, barely processing what had just happened. It's going to be okay, Kimberly assured her, voice low but firm. But she knew this was only the beginning. Judge Alden wouldn't go down without a fight. And whoever had leaked that file, whoever had left that trail for her to find, was still out there watching. Kimberly exhaled. She had just declared war on corruption, and she was ready for whatever came next. The echo of the courtroom doors closing behind her lingered in Kimberly's ears as she stepped outside into the crisp autumn air. The weight of what had just transpired sat heavily on her chest, but she refused to let it show. She had just exposed Judge Alden's corruption to an entire courtroom. But she knew this battle was far from over. The system didn't bend easily, and men like Alden didn't crumble overnight. As she walked down the courthouse steps, her phone vibrated in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw a familiar name flashing on the screen. Mom. Kimberly hesitated before answering. She already knew how this conversation was going to go. "Hey, Mama," she said, pressing the phone to her ear. Kimberly Ann Carter. Her mother's voice came through, firm yet laced with warmth. "I saw the news." Kimberly sighed, closing her eyes for a brief moment. "I figured you would. I told you, baby. You gotta be careful with these people," her mother warned. "These men don't like being challenged, especially by a black woman who's smarter than them." Kimberly's lips curled into a wry smile. "I never said I was trying to make friends." Her mother sighed on the other end. "I know, sweetheart. But you remember what happened to your daddy, don't you?" A pang of pain twisted in Kimberly's chest at the mention of her father. Of course, she remembered. Kimberly Carter hadn't been born into privilege. She hadn't attended elite prep schools or grown up in the affluent suburbs of D.C. No. Her story started in the heart of Atlanta, in a two-bedroom apartment where the walls were too thin and opportunity felt like a distant dream. Her father, James Carter, had been a public defender, a man who believed in justice, even when the system worked against him. He fought for the people the world had forgotten, the ones who couldn't afford high-priced lawyers or fancy defenses, and it had cost him everything. Kimberly was only 13 when she watched her father's career and his life fall apart. One night, James had been working late on a case involving a powerful real estate developer accused of exploiting low-income black families. He had uncovered something big. But before he could present his findings in court, he was arrested on fabricated charges. Kimberly never forgot the image of her father being taken away in handcuffs. He was convicted on trumped-up charges, sentenced to 10 years behind bars. The system he had dedicated his life to had betrayed him. Her mother, Deborah Carter, had done everything she could to keep their family together. She worked 2 jobs, barely making ends meet, while Kimberly was forced to grow up fast. She learned early on that justice wasn't something freely given. It had to be fought for. By the time she was 17, she had made a decision. She would become a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but one who had the power to bring down the very system that had stolen her father's life. And she had done just that. Through relentless determination and sheer willpower, Kimberly had secured a scholarship to Howard University. From there, she had worked her way through law school, graduating at the top of her class before landing a coveted position in the U.S. Attorney's Office. Now, at 35, she wasn't just a lawyer. She was a federal prosecutor, and she had just declared war on corruption. "You know, Mama," Kimberly said softly, "I remember everything." On the other end of the line, Deborah was silent for a moment. Then she spoke, her voice softer now. "I just don't want you to go through what your daddy did." Kimberly swallowed the lump in her throat. "I won't," she promised. "I'm not him. I have more power than he did. I have the law on my side." Her mother let out a humorless chuckle. "The law? Baby, the law don't mean nothing to men like Alden. They think they own it." Kimberly's grip on her phone tightened. "Then I'll remind them that they don't." There was another pause, and then her mother sighed. "Just promise me you'll be careful." Kimberly exhaled. "I promise." But as she ended the call and looked up at the towering buildings around her, she knew that promise wouldn't be easy to keep. The events of the day had already started to ripple through the city. By the time Kimberly returned to her office, at the U.S. Attorney's Office, her inbox was flooded with messages Some were from colleagues expressing shock and support, others from reporters hungry for a statement. Then there were the messages that weren't so friendly. A single email stood out. Among the rest, sender unknown subject. Know your place. Kimberly clicked it open, her eyes scanning the brief message. You made a mistake today. You don't belong in that courtroom. Walk away before you end up like your father. A chill ran down her spine. She knew this wasn't an idle threat. This wasn't just about a single case anymore. She had just uncovered something bigger, something that certain people didn't want exposed. But Kimberly wasn't the kind of woman who backed down. She took a deep breath, her mind racing through possibilities. If they thought threats would scare her, they didn't know who they were dealing with. Reaching for her phone, she scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she needed. Marcus Hale, a former police detective turned private investigator. Someone who, like her, had spent his life uncovering the rot within the system. She hit dial. After 2 rings, his deep voice came through. Carter? I need your help, she said without preamble. He didn't hesitate. Tell me everything. Kimberly glanced at her computer screen once more, at the email threatening her life. And then, with the steady resolve that had carried her through every obstacle in her life, she said, It's time to bring them down. The weight of the threat against her still lingered in Kimberly's mind as she sat at her desk in the dimly lit office of the U.S. Attorney's Office. The email had been clear. Someone wanted her out of this case. But walking away had never been in her nature. She had spent the last few hours combing through every detail of the case against William Porter, the landlord at the center of the trial she had just upended. The evidence against him had seemed strong at first, until she had dug deeper and realized the case was built on manipulated records and coerced testimonies. Now, with the judge's bias exposed and the case back under scrutiny, she knew she was stepping into dangerous territory. Her phone buzzed. It was Marcus Hale. Carter, he greeted, his voice low and urgent. We need to meet, now. She knew that tone. It meant he had something big. I'm still at the office, she said. No, he interrupted. Not there. This is too hot. Meet me at the Haven in an hour. Kimberly nodded, even though he couldn't see her. The Haven was a small, quiet bar in a less conspicuous part of town, a place where conversations weren't easily overheard. I'm on my way. The Haven was nearly empty when Kimberly arrived. The low hum of jazz music filled the space, and the dim lighting provided just enough anonymity. Marcus was already there, sitting at a corner booth, a folder in front of him. His usually composed expression was tight with urgency. Kimberly slid into the seat across from him. Talk to me. Marcus didn't waste time. He pushed the folder toward her. We've got a problem. She flipped it open and scanned the contents. Her breath hitched. It was a sworn statement from one of the key witnesses in the case against William Porter. But this statement completely contradicted what the witness had testified in court. Jason Patel, she muttered, reading the name. He was a former tenant who had originally claimed that Porter had unfairly evicted multiple black families, exploiting them for profit. But in this new statement, Patel admitted that he had been paid off to change his story. Kimberly's fingers curled around the edge of the folder. Who got to him? Marcus leaned back. Same people who are trying to get to you. Kimberly exhaled sharply, trying to process. This wasn't just a bad landlord exploiting tenants. This was something deeper, more organized. Marcus continued. I traced the money that paid off Patel. It didn't come from Porter directly. Kimberly's eyes snapped up. Then, who? Marcus hesitated before answering. A shell company. One that, when you dig far enough, ties back to Judge Alden. Kimberly felt a rush of adrenaline. If this was true, it meant Alden wasn't just biased. He was actively involved in a corrupt system that manipulated cases for personal gain. "We need Patel to go on record," Kimberly said. Marcus shook his head. "He's scared. I spoke to him once, but after that, he went underground. He knows what's at stake." Kimberly exhaled. She needed a plan. "Then we find him before they do." Kimberly and Marcus spent the next day tracking Patel's whereabouts. His apartment was empty, and his phone was disconnected. Then a breakthrough. A lead directed them to a motel on the outskirts of the city. Patel had been seen checking in 2 nights ago. They arrived at the motel just as the sun was setting, the neon sign flickering above them. Marcus parked the car a few spots away from the entrance. "This place looks like trouble," he muttered. Kimberly wasn't deterred. "So do we." They approached Patel's door. Kimberly knocked. Silence. She knocked again, harder this time. "Jason, it's Kimberly Carter. I need to talk to you." More silence. Then, a sudden crash from inside the room. Marcus reacted first, kicking the door open in one swift motion. The door swung inward, revealing a room in chaos. The bed was overturned, papers scattered across the floor, and the window was wide open. "Damn it!" Marcus cursed, rushing to the window. He looked outside, scanning the alley below. "He's gone." Kimberly picked up one of the scattered papers. It was a handwritten note. The words sent a chill down her spine. "I knew too much. Now they're after me. If you're reading this, it's too late." Her heart pounded. Whoever was behind this was getting desperate, and desperate people were dangerous. They returned to Kimberly's office, determined to piece together what Patel had known. Kimberly spread the papers out on her desk, sifting through them. Receipts, bank statements, rental agreements. Then she found it, a ledger. The columns were filled with payments, dates, and initials. Some were marked with an A, others with a P. She pointed at it. "Look at this." Marcus peered over her shoulder. "Bribes." "More than that." Kimberly's voice was tight with realization. "These payments aren't just for false testimony. They're payoffs to judges, attorneys, and city officials." Marcus whistled low. "This is bigger than we thought." Kimberly's mind raced. They had just found the smoking gun, evidence that tied Alden to a larger network of corruption that extended beyond this one case. She reached for her phone, dialing a number she hadn't called in years. After a few rings, a familiar voice answered. "Jennifer Reeves speaking?" Kimberly's grip on the phone tightened. Jennifer had been her best friend in law school, but they had drifted apart after Jennifer took a job with a private defense firm, one that had been known for protecting powerful figures. "Jennifer," she said, "I need to talk." A pause. Then Jennifer sighed. "I was wondering when you'd call." Kimberly frowned. "You knew?" Jennifer's voice was quiet. "I knew something was coming. And I also knew you wouldn't stop until you uncovered it." Kimberly's stomach twisted. "Tell me what you know." Another pause. Then Jennifer's voice dropped lower. "I can't talk over the phone. Meet me tomorrow morning, same place we used to study." Kimberly swallowed hard. Jennifer wouldn't have agreed to this if it wasn't serious. "I'll be there." As she ended the call, she turned back to Marcus. "We're not just exposing Alden," she said. "We're taking down an entire system." Marcus nodded. "Then let's make sure we do it right." Kimberly exhaled, steeling herself for what lay ahead. Because the deeper she dug, the more she realized. This fight wasn't just about one corrupt judge. It was about who really ran the city. The sun had barely risen over the city when Kimberly Carter arrived at the coffee shop. It was the same small cafe she and Jennifer Reeves had spent countless hours studying back in law school, a place that once symbolized ambition and promise. But today, the atmosphere felt different, heavy, tense. Kimberly scanned the room and spotted Jennifer sitting near the back, dressed sharply as always, but with a nervous edge she had never seen before. She took a slow breath and walked over. Jennifer looked up as Kimberly approached, her lips pressing into a tight line. "You actually came." Kimberly pulled out a chair and sat down. "I need answers." Jennifer sighed and glanced around before leaning in. "I don't have much time, and neither do you." Kimberly's stomach tightened. "Then start talking." Jennifer hesitated, then lowered her voice. "You were right about Alden, but it goes beyond him." She slid a flash drive across the table. "This has everything: emails, financial records, internal memos." Kimberly picked up the flash drive, turning it in her fingers. "Where did you get this?" Jennifer's jaw clenched. "Let's just say I was supposed to be on the other side of this case." Kimberly's eyes narrowed. "You were working for them?" Jennifer exhaled sharply. "I didn't have a choice, but I'm choosing now." She leaned in further. "You need to be careful, Kimberly. You don't know who you're up against." Kimberly stared at her for a long moment, weighing her words. Then she stood, slipping the flash drive into her pocket. "I never do," she said, "but that's never stopped me before." Jennifer's eyes flashed with something unreadable: admiration, maybe regret. "Good luck," she whispered. Kimberly turned and walked away, knowing this was just the beginning of the war. Back at her office, Kimberly plugged in the flash drive and opened the files. Her breath caught. Emails between Judge Alden, William Porter, and a list of high-profile names: politicians, real estate tycoons, even law enforcement officials. They had been manipulating court rulings for years, evicting vulnerable tenants under false pretenses and selling their homes to developers for massive profits. But what made her blood run cold was a specific transaction: a $500,000 payment to Alden, wired just 2 weeks before Patel changed his testimony. This was it. Concrete proof. She immediately called Marcus Hale. "Tell me you found something," he answered. "I found everything," she said. "This isn't just about Alden. We're looking at a full-scale operation. I have proof of financial transactions." Marcus let out a low whistle. "Then we need to move fast. Alden's people will catch on." Kimberly hesitated. "There's more." Jennifer gave me the files. "She was working for them?" Silence on the other end. "Think we can trust her?" Marcus finally asked. Kimberly exhaled. "I don't know, but I do know we need allies." Marcus hummed in agreement. "Speaking of which, I may have a lead. There's a former city official, Michael Sterling. He left his post after a sudden disagreement with the mayor. Word is, he knows how this whole machine runs." Kimberly nodded, already making a mental list of their next steps. "Set up a meeting," she said. "If he knows something, I want to hear it." Later that night, Kimberly and Marcus met Michael Sterling at an abandoned parking garage, a setting straight out of a political thriller. Sterling was a middle-aged black man with sharp eyes and a guarded demeanor. "I know why you're here," he said, "and I know you think you're about to take down the system." Kimberly crossed her arms. "That's the plan." Sterling chuckled darkly. "Good luck with that. You think Alden is bad. He's just a pawn. The real power runs deeper." Kimberly held up the flash drive. "Then, help us expose it." Sterling hesitated, then sighed. "You want the truth." He stepped closer. "There's a reason I left my position. I started asking too many questions about where the city's money was really going." "And?" Marcus prompted. Sterling's gaze hardened. And one night, I found my brakes cut. Kimberly's breath hitched. Sterling looked at her sharply. These people don't just fire you, they erase you. Kimberly met his gaze, unwavering. Then let's make sure they can't erase all of us. Sterling studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, I'll tell you everything I know. With Sterling's testimony, Jennifer's files, and Patel's missing testimony, Kimberly and Marcus had enough to make their next move. But before they could go public, they needed to ensure their safety. Marcus reached out to a trusted journalist, Daniel Perez, to prepare an expose, while Kimberly quietly arranged for federal oversight to be involved. And then, the inevitable happened. Her office was broken into. Files were shredded. Her computer wiped clean. A warning loud and clear. And worse, Sterling vanished. Marcus called her, his voice tight. They got to him. Kimberly gritted her teeth. Not if we find him first. She knew they were running out of time. Alden and his people were closing in. And if they wanted to win this fight, they had to strike first. The moment Kimberly unlocked her apartment door, she knew something was wrong. A chill ran down her spine as she noticed the slightly ajar window in her living room. Her hands instinctively tightened into fists. She took a cautious step forward, scanning the dimly lit space. Everything seemed in place until she reached her desk. Her files were gone. The laptop she had used earlier, wiped clean. Her breath hitched when she spotted something sitting neatly on her desk. A single bullet, placed atop a torn piece of her legal brief. A warning. She exhaled sharply, backing away. Just as she reached for her phone, a rustling sound came from the hallway. Someone was still inside. Without thinking, she grabbed the nearest object, a heavy glass paperweight, and held her breath. A shadow moved. Then, a creak. She spun around, swinging the paperweight, but a strong hand caught her wrist midair. Whoa, it's me, Marcus Hale. Her heart pounded as she yanked her hand free. Damn it, Marcus. What the hell are you doing here? I was going to ask you the same thing, he replied, scanning the room. His face darkened when he saw the bullet on her desk. Kimberly swallowed hard. They were here. Marcus pulled his gun, moving swiftly toward the window. He peered outside before locking it. You need to get out of here. Now. Not without my files. They're gone, Kim, he said firmly. And if we stay here, we might be too. Kimberly clenched her jaw. She hated this, hated running, but she wasn't reckless. Nodding, she grabbed her coat. Let's go. As they stepped out into the hallway, a dark figure watched them from a parked car across the street. The war had just escalated. They drove in silence. Marcus took a longer route, checking the mirrors every few minutes to see if they were being followed. They ended up at a safe house, a small, nondescript apartment owned by one of Marcus's trusted contacts. Kimberly slumped onto the couch, rubbing her temples. This is bigger than Alden. They're coming after everyone. Marcus nodded grimly. They want to shut you up. Kimberly let out a bitter chuckle. Well, they're failing. Marcus tossed her a burner phone. Use this from now on. Kimberly turned the cheap device in her hands. Do we have anything left? Marcus hesitated, then pulled out a hidden USB drive from his pocket. Her eyes widened. You think I wouldn't make a backup? Marcus smirked. Relief washed over her. You beautiful paranoid bastard. But before she could celebrate, Marcus's expression turned serious. There's something else. A name showed up in the files Jennifer gave us. Kimberly straightened. Who? Marcus took a deep breath. William Porter. Her stomach dropped. Porter was more than a real estate mogul. He was a kingmaker in the political world. His influence extended from City Hall to the governor's mansion. If he was involved, this corruption went to the top. Kimberly's fingers tightened around the burner phone. We need more than just documents. We need a witness. Marcus nodded. And I think I know who. The next day, they met with Jennifer Reeves again. This time, she looked exhausted. Her usual composed demeanor was cracked. "They're on to me," she admitted, her hands trembling as she lit a cigarette. "My apartment was ransacked this morning. They're sending a message." Kimberly sat down across from her. "Then, help us take them down." Jennifer let out a dry laugh. "You think it's that simple? William Porter owns half this city. The police, the courts, they work for him." Kimberly leaned in. "Then we make sure the feds get involved." Jennifer hesitated. "There's something else. Porter isn't just bribing judges. He's laundering money through Alden's court rulings." Kimberly's mind raced. "How?" Jennifer pulled out a small ledger book and slid it across the table. Fake eviction cases, forged foreclosure documents, inflated settlements. He moves money through these fake claims, millions at a time. Kimberly flipped through the pages, her blood boiling with each transaction she read. "This is it," she whispered. "This is what will destroy him." Jennifer gave a bitter smile. "If you live long enough to use it." That night, Kimberly met with Daniel Perez, the journalist Marcus had contacted. "This is career-ending stuff," Daniel said, as he scrolled through the ledger book. "If this is real, we're looking at one of the biggest judicial corruption scandals in decades." Kimberly nodded. "I need you to go public before they bury this story." Daniel frowned. "I can't run it without corroboration. You need a statement from a key player." Kimberly exhaled. "Then we bring in Michael Sterling." Marcus's jaw tightened. "If we can find him." Daniel glanced between them. "If I run this, you'll be making enemies in every high place imaginable." Kimberly met his gaze. "Good. Let them come." The next morning, all hell broke loose. Daniel published an explosive article exposing the corruption. Names were dropped: Judge Alden, William Porter, and several real estate tycoons. It dominated the news cycle, sending shockwaves through the legal and political world. And then, the retaliation began. The police arrived at Kimberly's office with a warrant for her arrest. The charge? Obstruction of justice. Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Back off or next time." It's not just a warning. Jennifer Reeves went missing that night, and as Kimberly was being led away in handcuffs, she realized this fight was far from over. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into Kimberly's wrists as the officer yanked her forward. The bright camera flashes blinded her, and the shouting of reporters blurred into a single chaotic roar. "Miss Carter, why are you being arrested? Is this retaliation for your investigation? Do you have any comments on Judge Alden's involvement?" Kimberly clenched her jaw, keeping her head high as she was pushed into the police car. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. From the back seat, she saw Marcus watching from across the street. He had his phone in hand, his face unreadable, but she knew he was already working on getting her out. But even as the car sped toward the station, a single thought rang in her head. They wanted her silenced. They had just made a huge mistake. Kimberly sat in the stark, windowless interrogation room, her hands still cuffed to the metal table. Across from her, Detective Harris, a cop with years of experience and a reputation for taking orders from the highest bidder, leaned back in his chair. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice laced with mock sympathy. "Obstruction of justice is a serious charge, but if you cooperate, maybe we can make all this go away." Kimberly smirked. I'm sure we can. Just drop the charges, and I'll forget you wasted my time. Harris chuckled. See that attitude? That's why you're here. He slid a folder across the table. Witness tampering, leaking confidential documents, bribing a journalist. These are the accusations against you. Kimberly barely glanced at the papers. Fabricated charges. A desperate attempt to bury the real story. Harris sighed. Look, I get it. You pissed off the wrong people. But Alden, Porter, you think you can take them down and walk away untouched? Kimberly leaned forward. I don't think. I know. The door swung open before Harris could reply. A female officer stepped inside. She made bail. Kimberly stood, flashing Harris a victorious smile. See you in court. As soon as Kimberly stepped outside the precinct, the media swarmed. Marcus was waiting, ushering her toward a podium hastily set up on the courthouse steps. Kimberly took the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her voice steady. I was arrested today on false charges. This is a direct attack on my work to expose corruption in our legal system. And let me be clear, this will not stop me. Reporters shouted questions. Ms. Carter, are you saying Judge Alden is retaliating against you? Kimberly's lips curled into a smirk. I'm saying that if Judge Alden had nothing to hide, I wouldn't be standing here right now. The crowd erupted. Marcus grabbed her elbow. That's enough for now, he muttered. As they stepped away, he whispered, That was reckless. Kimberly shrugged. That was the truth. But inside, she knew she had just painted a target on her back. That night, Kimberly received a sealed summons. She was being ordered to appear before a judicial ethics panel. An attempt to discredit her. Marcus paced her office. They want to suspend your license. Kimberly clenched her fists. They can try. She turned to Jennifer Reeves, who had finally resurfaced after days in hiding. Do we still have Porter's financial records? Jennifer hesitated. Most of them. But there's something bigger. A new witness. Kimberly raised an eyebrow. Who? Jennifer exhaled. Alden's former court clerk. She's willing to testify? Kimberly's heart pounded. This could change everything. The ethics hearing was set for the following week, but Kimberly wasn't going to wait. She appeared on a primetime news show, directly calling out the corruption. Our justice system is being weaponized to silence those who challenge the powerful. But I will not back down. The backlash was immediate. Judge Alden released a public statement, condemning Kimberly as a reckless opportunist seeking attention. The mayor's office refused to comment, and then the death threats started coming. Her office was vandalized. A bullet was mailed to her home. But Kimberly? She kept pushing forward. The courtroom was packed. This time, Kimberly wasn't the one on trial. Alden was. The moment his former clerk took the stand, the air in the room changed. I was forced to falsify eviction notices. I saw bribes being exchanged in his office. A murmur spread through the audience. And then, Jennifer Reeves presented a recording. Alden's own voice was played over the speakers. I don't care if they lose their homes. Just make sure my cut is in my account. The room exploded. Alden's face turned pale. The judge overseeing the case slammed his gavel. Order, order. But the damage was done. Alden was finished. By the end of the day, Judge Alden was formally removed from the bench and placed under investigation for fraud and corruption. Porter, still untouchable. For now. Kimberly stood on the courthouse steps, staring at the skyline. Marcus joined her. One down. A whole system left to go. Kimberly exhaled. Then let's get to work. Kimberly sat in her office, exhaustion pressing against her bones. The weight of the recent trial still lingered, but there was no time to celebrate. Alden was gone, but the real masterminds were still out there. Her phone buzzed. Jamal. Hey, Kim. Just finished up my research on Porter's connections. I found something huge. Meet me at Mom's place in an hour. Kimberly frowned. Jamal never called her Kim, unless something was seriously wrong. She texted back. Be careful. Call me when you get there. No response. Her gut twisted. Something wasn't right. She tried calling. Straight to voicemail. Kimberly grabbed her coat. Marcus, I need you. Jamal's missing. Marcus was already on his feet. Let's go. They sped toward Jamal's last known location. Kimberly's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He said he found something on Porter. Marcus cursed. That's not good. As they pulled up to their mother's house, an eerie silence greeted them. The porch light flickered. The front door was slightly ajar. Kimberly's heart pounded. She pushed the door open, her voice shaking. Jamal? Nothing. The house had been ransacked. Papers scattered, drawers yanked open. The TV screen was shattered, and a chair was overturned. And on the kitchen table, a note, written in red ink. Back off or he dies. Kimberly staggered back. Marcus grabbed the note, his jaw clenched. They took him. Her entire world spun. Jamal was her baby brother, the one who still called her Kimmy when he wanted to annoy her, the one who believed in her more than anyone. And now, he was gone. Hours passed with no leads. The police were useless, treating Jamal's disappearance as if he'd just wandered off. Kimberly stormed out of the precinct. They don't care. Marcus followed. We'll find him ourselves. A car pulled up beside them. The tinted window rolled down. Inside sat Jonathan Porter. Kimberly's blood boiled. Porter smirked. Miss Carter, you've been quite the nuisance. She lunged forward, but Marcus held her back. Porter tutted. That temper of yours. I can see why your brother is in so much trouble. Kimberly's fists clenched. Where is he? Porter simply smiled. You have 48 hours to drop your investigation. Or Jamal. Well, let's just say accidents happen. Then the window rolled up and the car drove off. Kimberly felt her stomach drop. This wasn't just about justice anymore. This was personal. Kimberly gathered her allies. Jennifer Reeves, now fully on her side, working behind the scenes to uncover Porter's network. Marcus Hale, the cop risking everything to bring Jamal home. Sophia Lynn, a former cybercrime expert, digging through encrypted files for any lead. We need to find where they are keeping Jamal, Marcus said. Jennifer pulled up a map. I've got a few properties owned by Porter's shell companies, but there's one that stands out. An abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Sophia tapped her laptop. I checked the power grid. Someone recently restored electricity there. They're using it. Kimberly didn't hesitate. We go in. Tonight. Marcus grabbed her arm. That's not suicide. Kimberly's eyes burned with determination. Then let's not get caught. Under the cover of darkness, they approached the warehouse. Kimberly's heart pounded as she pressed her back against the cold steel wall. Through a broken window, she could see two guards pacing inside. Jamal was tied to a chair, a bruise darkening his cheek. Kimberly's breath caught in her throat. We need a distraction, Marcus whispered. Sophia smirked. I've got something better. She pulled out a phone jammer. This will knock out their security cameras and cell signals for 5 minutes. That's all we need, Kimberly said. Sophia activated the jammer. Kimberly moved first. She slipped inside, silent as a shadow. With precision she struck, one guard down. Marcus took the other. Jamal lifted his head, his eyes wide with relief. Kim. She cut his ropes. Let's get you out of here. But before they could move, a gun cocked behind them. Porter's men had arrived, and this time, there was no escape. Porter walked in, smug as ever. Impressive, he said. But did you really think I wouldn't be prepared? Kimberly stood her ground. You made a mistake taking my brother. Porter chuckled. Did I? Because now, I have both of you? Kimberly's mind raced. There had to be a way out. Then, sirens in the distance. Porter's face darkened. What the? Jennifer's voice crackled in Kimberly's earpiece. You're welcome. The police stormed in. Porter's men scrambled to escape. And just like that, the game had changed. Porter was arrested. But Kimberly knew this wasn't over. As she sat with Jamal in the hospital, she took his hand. I'm sorry. Jamal smiled weakly. You saved me. That's all that matters. But Kimberly knew the fight was just beginning, because Porter had connections, and they would come for her next. The media exploded with the news of Jonathan Porter's arrest. Corrupt developer exposed. Connections to Judge Alden revealed. Kimberly Carter, the woman who took down a system of lies. The headlines painted Kimberly as a hero. But she knew better. This war wasn't over. It was just beginning. Kimberly leaned against the cold window of her office. The city skyline stretched before her, glittering like a false promise. Marcus entered, tossing a file onto her desk. We have a problem. She opened it. Inside were documents, bank transactions, emails, evidence linking more judges, city officials, and high-profile attorneys to Porter's criminal network. This goes deeper than we thought, Marcus said grimly. Kimberly nodded. We have to keep going. Marcus hesitated. You're making enemies, Kim. She turned to him, fire in her eyes. Good. That means I'm doing something right. But not everyone stood by her. Jennifer Reeves, the woman who had once been her closest ally, was nowhere to be found. Kimberly called. No answer. She drove to Jennifer's office. The nameplate was gone. The office cleared out. Panic twisted in her chest. A new voicemail appeared. She pressed play. Jennifer's voice, shaking. Kim, I'm sorry. I had to make a choice. They came for me. They gave me an offer I couldn't refuse. I can't fight this anymore. Stay safe. And don't trust anyone. The message ended. Kimberly felt like she'd been punched in the gut. Jennifer had switched sides. And that meant she had just handed over everything Kimberly had worked for. Within 24 hours, everything began to unravel. Key witnesses recanted their statements. Evidence mysteriously disappeared. Prosecutors dropped charges against some of Porter's associates. The system was fighting back. Kimberly slammed her hands on her desk, rage coursing through her veins. They're trying to erase everything. Marcus sat across from her, jaw clenched. We need another way in. She nodded, mind racing. If the legal system is compromised, we'll have to take this to the court of public opinion. That night, Kimberly sat in front of a live camera, her face illuminated by the glow of a single studio light. This is not just about one corrupt judge, she began. This is about an entire system designed to silence truth and protect the powerful. She laid out the facts, the bribery, the intimidation, the way witnesses were forced into silence. And then, she named names, judges, senators, lawyers, billionaires. The broadcast went viral within minutes. But with the truth out in the open, Kimberly knew what was coming next. And she was right. That same night, her apartment was broken into. Files were stolen, her laptop was wiped remotely. A bullet shattered her living room window. Kimberly hit the floor, her heart pounding. She reached for her phone. One new text message. You don't know when to stop, do you? She gritted her teeth. Bring it on. The next morning, Marcus met her at a diner. You need to go underground for a while, he said. Kimberly stirred her coffee, exhausted but defiant. And let them win. He shook his head. Number. But you need to be alive to finish this fight. She sighed. He wasn't wrong, fine, she said. But I need one more thing before I disappear. Marcus leaned in. What? Kimberly's eyes burned with determination. A way to take them all down, once and for all. The day had come. Judge Alden was finally on trial. The federal courthouse was overflowing with reporters, activists, and legal professionals. The air was thick with tension. Kimberly stood outside the entrance, watching as protesters chanted, "Justice for the people, no more corruption." She felt a hand on her shoulder. Marcus, you ready for this? He asked. She took a deep breath. I was born ready. Inside the courtroom, Alden sat at the defendant's table, a far cry from his usual place of power. His expression was unreadable, but Kimberly could see the fear in his eyes. He knew he was losing. The prosecution laid out the charges: bribery, obstruction of justice, collusion with criminals, tampering with evidence, threatening key witnesses, and the list went on and on. The judge overseeing the case was Justice Robert Calloway, a man known for his no-nonsense approach to the law. This trial, he said, adjusting his glasses, will determine not only the fate of one judge, but the integrity of our entire legal system. Alden shifted in his seat. He wasn't untouchable anymore. The first witness was Jennifer Reeves. She walked to the stand, her hands slightly shaking. Ms. Reeves, can you describe your relationship with Judge Alden? The prosecutor asked. Jennifer swallowed hard. He was my mentor, at first, but over time, I realized he wasn't interested in justice. He was interested in control. Kimberly watched as Jennifer hesitated, her guilt obvious. But then she took a deep breath and continued. He blackmailed me. He forced me to alter case outcomes. He threatened my family if I didn't comply. Gasps echoed through the courtrooms. Kimberly clenched her fists. She knew it. The next piece of evidence was a bombshell. A secret video recording. One of Alden's former assistants had recorded a conversation between him and a real estate tycoon, Jonathan Porter. The jury watched as Alden smirked on screen. That woman, Kimberly Carter. She's a damn nuisance. I'll bury her case before it ever reaches trial. And if she fights back? Porter asked. Alden laughed. Then we'll make her regret ever stepping foot in my courtroom. The entire room went silent. Then whispers, shocked gasps. Kimberly felt her heart pounding. The judge turned to Alden. Do you have any response to this evidence, Mr. Alden? Alden's face was beet red. He looked like he wanted to rip the microphone out of the stand. I was set up, he stammered. This is taken out of context. The jury didn't buy it. Hours passed. The courtroom held its breath as the jury returned. Alden sat frozen, his hands clutching the table. The judge read the verdict. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty on all charges. The room erupted. Alden's jaw dropped. His entire career, his legacy of corruption, was over. Kimberly closed her eyes, letting the moment sink in. Justice had been served. But as Alden was led away in handcuffs, he turned to her. His voice was low, filled with venom. You think this ends with me? He whispered. You have no idea what you've started. Kimberly held his gaze. I know exactly what I've started, she said. Alden's conviction sent shockwaves through the legal system. Other judges started resigning before their own secrets could be exposed. Prosecutors reopened cases that had been unfairly decided. The media hailed Kimberly as the woman who brought down a corrupt empire. But Kimberly knew this was just the first step. That night, she returned to her office, exhausted but determined. A single envelope sat on her desk. Inside was a letter. Kimberly Carter, you've started something you can't finish. Walk away now or face the consequences. No signature, no return address, just a warning. Kimberly smirked. Let them come, she whispered. She wasn't walking away from anything. She was just getting started. The courtroom was empty now. The echoes of Alden's conviction still lingered in the air, like an aftershock. Kimberly Carter sat alone in her office, staring at the headline plastered across every major news outlet. Fallen judge, Alden guilty on all charges. Corruption exposed, how one woman took down a judicial tyrant. A system under fire. What happens next? Her phone buzzed nonstop. Calls from reporters, politicians, former law school colleagues. Everyone wanted to talk. But Kimberly wasn't celebrating. This wasn't over. Not even close. Her email inbox was flooded with anonymous tips about other corrupt judges, attorneys, and politicians. The conviction of Judge Alden had cracked open something much bigger. And now, everyone was watching her next move. The case against Alden had been the first domino. Within days, the Judicial Ethics Committee launched investigations into at least 5 other judges suspected of corruption. One by one, they started resigning. But not all of them went quietly. Judge Malcolm Graves, a longtime ally of Alden, held a press conference outside the courthouse. These are baseless attacks on the integrity of the judiciary, he said, glaring at the cameras. This is a witch hunt, led by a woman with a personal vendetta against the legal system. Kimberly watched the broadcast from her office, arms crossed. The smear campaign had begun. They were painting her as the villain. Then came the unexpected. An email arrived with an official government seal. From the Office of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Subject: urgent meeting request. Kimberly's heartbeat quickened. She clicked. Your work in exposing judicial corruption has not gone unnoticed. The Senate Judiciary Committee would like to invite you to testify in a hearing regarding necessary legal reforms. We believe your insight and expertise will be instrumental in shaping the future of our justice system. Please confirm your availability. Office of Senator William Harrington. Kimberly leaned back in her chair, gripping the armrest. The federal government wanted her to help reform the system. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but it also put an even bigger target on her back. That night, Kimberly drove home from work, exhausted. As she pulled into her driveway, she noticed something was off. The porch light flickered. The front door was slightly ajar. Her heart pounded. She reached for her phone, dialing Marcus Hale. Marcus, she whispered, someone's been in my house. Stay in the car, he ordered. I'm on my way. But before she could react, a black SUV pulled up behind her. The driver's window rolled down slowly, and a voice, low and threatening, spoke from the darkness. You should have walked away, Miss Carter. Then, the SUV sped off into the night. Kimberly sat there, her hands clenched into fists. Whoever they weren't done with her yet. The next morning, the attacks escalated. Headlines shifted from celebrating her victory to questioning her motives. Is Kimberly Carter a hero or a political opportunist? Corruption. Fighter or power-hungry attorney? How far will Carter go to control the courts? Kimberly slammed her laptop shut. They're coming after you, Marcus said, standing by the window. I know, she muttered. Who's pulling the strings? She exhaled sharply. That's what we need to find out, because whoever was behind this was bigger than Alden. This wasn't just about one corrupt judge anymore. This was about a system that wanted to stay broken. The next attack came through the courts themselves. A formal ethics complaint was filed against her, accusing her of professional misconduct, using her federal position for personal gain, illegally influencing judicial proceedings. It was blatantly false, but the complaint put her law license at risk. If she lost, she wouldn't just be out of a job. She'd be discredited permanently, and that was exactly what they wanted. Just as Kimberly was preparing her legal defense, a knock came at her office door. She looked up and froze. It was Jennifer Reeves, the woman who had once betrayed her. Jennifer stepped forward. "I need to talk." Kimberly folded her arms. "Why would I listen to anything you have to say?" Jennifer hesitated. Then she placed a file on the desk. "Because I know who's really behind all of this." Kimberly's eyes narrowed. She slowly reached for the file, flipping it open. Inside were names, transactions, and secret meetings. At the top of the list, Senator William Harrington. Kimberly's breath caught in her throat. The same man who had invited her to testify in Washington was orchestrating the attacks against her. The realization hit like a freight train. The corruption didn't just stop at judges, it went higher, all the way to Washington. D.C. A chilling thought crept into her mind. What if this wasn't just about covering up Alden's crimes? What if this was about controlling the justice system at the highest levels? Kimberly clenched her jaw. This wasn't just a fight against a few bad judges anymore. This wasn't just a fight against a few bad judges anymore. This was a war for the soul of American justice. And she wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. Kimberly Carter knew they were closing in on her. For weeks, she had been fighting an uphill battle, exposing corruption in the judiciary, taking down a powerful judge, and now she had stepped into something bigger than she ever imagined. Her face was all over the news. The public loved her. The government hated her. And the people in power, they feared her. But fear bred desperation. And desperate people were dangerous. She was about to learn just how far they would go to stop her. It started with the break-in at her home. Then the false ethics charges. Now it was death threats. One morning, as she arrived at her office, a single envelope sat on her desk. No return address, no markings, just her name. Kimberly Carter. She opened it slowly, heart pounding. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Walk away or be buried. Her stomach twisted into knots. This wasn't just a warning. It was a promise. Kimberly had security cameras around her home. But even that wasn't enough. That night, she was working late in her office when her phone buzzed. A security alert. Motion detected. Front porch. Her heart raced. She clicked the feed. The screen showed a dark figure in a hoodie standing at her front door. Then, the figure turned toward the camera and held up a matchstick. Kimberly's blood ran cold. She grabbed her keys, rushing out. But before she could call the police, boom! The front of her house exploded into flames. The force knocked her off her feet. The air filled with thick smoke. Neighbors ran outside, screaming. Firefighters arrived within minutes. By the time they put the fire out, her house was gone. Everything burned to ash. Everything, except for one message spray-painted on the sidewalk. Stay silent, or this gets worse. Kimberly stood in the rubble, fists clenched. She was homeless, but she wasn't defeated. They thought this would scare her. They were wrong. This only meant one thing. She was getting too close to the truth. The next morning, federal agents arrived at her office. "Miss Carter, we need to talk." Two agents, both in black suits, flashed their badges. Kimberly narrowed her eyes. FBI. What do you want? Agent Donovan, the older of the two, spoke first. We're here to discuss your case and your safety. She crossed her arms. You mean you're here to shut me up? Donovan didn't deny it. We have reason to believe there's a serious threat against your life. Kimberly scoffed. No kidding. My house was just firebombed. Agent Rodriguez, the younger agent, looked at her with concern. You need to be careful, Ms. Carter. These people, whoever they are, they're not just some low-level criminals. They're powerful. Kimberly leaned forward. Good. That means I'm making the right people nervous. The agents exchanged glances. Then Donovan pulled out a file and slid it across the desk. We need your help, too. Kimberly frowned, flipping it open. Inside were photos, financial records, classified reports, and at the center of it all, Senator William Harrington, the same man who invited her to testify in Washington. Her stomach dropped. What is this? She asked. Donovan sighed. Proof that this corruption goes all the way to the top. Kimberly clenched her fists. This wasn't just about Judge Alden anymore. This was bigger. This was about a system-wide cover-up. Kimberly had a choice. Walk away, take a new job, start over, and never look back. Or fight until the end. She didn't even hesitate. I want in. Donovan nodded. Then we need to move fast. The FBI set up a sting operation. The plan: catch Harrington and his people red-handed. Kimberly would go undercover, pretending to negotiate a deal to walk away. She would wear a wire, record everything. The meeting was set for that night, a private club downtown. As she walked in, her heart pounded. Hucked at a table in the back, Harrington was waiting. He smirked. Ms. Carter, I assume you've come to your senses? Kimberly sat down, smiled, and said, Let's talk. Everything was going according to plan, until Marcus Hale, her closest ally, burst into the club. Kimberly, get out. It's a trap. Her blood ran cold. She turned, just in time to see Harrington's men draw their guns. Everything erupted into chaos. Shots fired. Tables overturned. Kimberly hit the ground, covering her head. She heard Harrington shouting, Get her out of here. Strong hands grabbed her, yanking her up. She struggled, but they were too strong. She was thrown into a black SUV. The door slammed shut. The engine roared to life. And the last thing she saw was Marcus fighting off the men alone. Before the car sped off into the night, Kimberly woke up in darkness. Her head was pounding, her wrists bound, her mouth gagged. The air was thick with gasoline and sweat. She could hear the hum of an engine, a car. She was in the back of an SUV, moving fast. She fought against the restraints, twisting her wrists, trying to break free. But the zip ties dug into her skin, cutting deep. Her heart pounded. She had been in danger before. But this was different. This wasn't just about a case anymore. This was about survival. Up front, she heard two men talking. Their voices were low, tense. One of them, the driver, was calm, calculating. The other was nervous. Are you sure this is what Harrington wants? The nervous one asked. The driver snorted. What do you think, idiot? You saw what happened back there. She's a problem. But the driver cut him off. We don't ask questions. We just follow orders. Kimberly's stomach twisted. She knew what that meant. They weren't taking her to negotiate. They were taking her to silence her. Permanently. Kimberly closed her eyes, forcing herself to think. Panic wouldn't save her. She needed a plan. Step 1. Find something, anything, to cut the zip ties. She shifted her hands, feeling around. The floor of the SUV was rough, covered in loose gravel and bits of metal. Then, her fingers brushed against something sharp, a jagged edge of broken plastic. Perfect. She twisted her wrists, scraping the ties against the sharp edge. Slow. Deliberate. The plastic cut into her skin, but she didn't stop. She couldn't, because if she failed, she wouldn't get another chance. Suddenly, the driver's phone rang. Kimberly froze. The driver picked up. "Yeah?" A deep voice came through the speaker, a voice Kimberly recognized instantly. Senator Harrington. Her jaw clenched. "Is it done?" Harrington asked. The driver hesitated. "Not yet. We're on the way." Harrington's voice turned cold. "Make sure it is. No loose ends." Kimberly's blood ran cold. She knew what that meant. She had minutes, maybe less, before they ended this. She needed to act. Now the zip ties finally snapped. Kimberly didn't think. She moved. She lunged forward, grabbing the nervous guy's neck from behind. He yelled, flailing. The driver swerved, trying to shake her off. Kimberly held on, using the momentum to slam the man's head against the window. Once, twice. On the third hit, he went limp. The driver cursed. "You!" Kimberly grabbed the wheel, yanking it hard. The SUV spun out of control. Screeching tires, blinding headlights, then impact. The world erupted into chaos. Kimberly woke up to the sound of sirens. Her body ached. The SUV was upside down, steam rising from the crushed hood. The driver gone. The other man unconscious. She had seconds before reinforcements arrived. Summoning every ounce of strength, she crawled out of the wreckage. Her ankle throbbed, her vision blurred, but she forced herself to move, because she wasn't safe yet. She stumbled onto the road, just as headlights appeared in the distance, a black car, speeding toward her. She braced herself. Then she heard a voice. "Kimberly, get in." Her heart leapt. It was Marcus Hale. Marcus slammed the brakes. Kimberly dived into the car. The moment she hit the seat, Marcus floored it. Tires screeched. Bullets ripped through the air behind them. Kimberly ducked. Marcus swerved, dodging the gunfire. Then silence. They were gone. Safe. For now. Back at a safe house, Kimberly finally caught her breath. Marcus handed her a burner phone. "Call the FBI. Tell them everything." She hesitated. "They already know." Marcus frowned. "Then why aren't they doing anything?" Kimberly's chest tightened. Because she knew the answer. Because this corruption went all the way to the top. The FBI was compromised. No one was coming to save her. If she wanted justice, she'd have to take matters into her own hands. The next morning, the entire country woke up to a bombshell. A video, leaked to every news station. It showed Judge Alden's corruption, Senator Harrington's involvement, the cover-up within the FBI, and at the center of it all, Kimberly Carter, a woman they tried to silence, a woman who refused to back down, a woman who just exposed the biggest political scandal in decades. Within hours, the FBI launched a full-scale investigation. Senator Harrington resigned in disgrace. Judge Alden was sentenced to 20 years in prison. And Kimberly? She was offered a job, a position in the Federal Judiciary Committee, to fix the system from the inside. It was everything she had fought for. But as she stood before the cameras, ready to accept, she hesitated, because she knew the fight wasn't over. Not yet. Kimberly Carter stood in front of the grand courthouse, its marble steps gleaming under the morning sun. It had been 2 weeks since the scandal broke. 2 weeks since Judge Alden was sentenced. 2 weeks since Senator Harrington's empire collapsed. 2 weeks since Kimberly was offered a position on the Federal Judiciary Committee, a chance to fix the system from within. But now, as she stood here, a single question burned in her mind. Had she really won? Because behind the victory, behind the headlines, she could still feel it. The weight of an unfinished fight. Inside the courthouse, a panel of senior judges awaited her decision. Judge Eleanor Wallace, one of the most respected legal minds in the country, greeted her with a nod. "Kimberly, you have a historic opportunity before you. We need someone like you." The other judges nodded in agreement. Kimberly felt the pressure mount. They wanted her to join them, to bring change from the inside, but she had spent her entire career fighting against this system. Could she really trust it now? She glanced at the contract on the table. One signature, one pen stroke, and she would become a federal judge. Suddenly, a memory surfaced. Her mother's voice, soft yet firm. "Always do what's right, even if you stand alone." Kimberly closed her eyes, breathing deeply. She had fought too hard, lost too much, to let her mother's words fade now. And then, her phone buzzed. A new email from an anonymous sender. Subject: "Urgent. You missed one." Kimberly's pulse spiked. She clicked the email and froze. Attached was a case file, one that shouldn't exist, one that suggested the corruption hadn't ended, one that proved the war was far from over. Kimberly skimmed through the file, and what she saw made her stomach drop. A secret offshore account linked to Judge Alden. Evidence that another judge, a sitting Supreme Court justice, was involved. A list of names, people who had been silenced. This wasn't just about Alden. This was bigger, way bigger. And whoever sent this file wanted her to find out the truth. But why send it now? And more importantly, who was behind it? Before Kimberly could process it all, her phone rang. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Who is this?" Silence. Then a voice, low, unfamiliar. "They know you have it." Kimberly's breath caught. "Who are you?" she demanded. "Someone who wants you alive. Listen carefully." A noise, a shout in the background. Then, the call cut off. The line went dead. Kimberly's heart pounded. Someone was watching, someone was listening, and someone didn't want her digging any deeper. Kimberly looked back at the judges. They were waiting for her to sign, to accept the position, to play by the rules. She glanced at the contract, then at the email on her screen, and suddenly, she knew. She had two choices. One, accept the position, play it safe, and work within the system. Two, walk away, go underground, and expose the truth, no matter the cost. Her hand hovered over the pen. Then, she did something no one expected. She picked up the contract and tore it in half. The room went silent. Judge Wallace's eyes widened. "Kimberly, what are you doing?" Kimberly stood. Her voice was steady. "I'm doing what's right." Then, she turned, walked to the door, and left. Because this fight, it wasn't over. Not even close. Kimberly is offered a position as a federal judge. She receives a mysterious email, proving the corruption isn't over. A mysterious caller warns her that she's being watched. Kimberly chooses to walk away, refusing to be controlled. Kimberly Carter walked away from the courthouse, the crisp autumn wind biting at her skin. She had just torn up the offer of a lifetime. She had just defied the system that tried to absorb her. And now, she was on her own. Or at least, that's what they wanted her to believe. Because if this fight had taught her anything, it was that she wasn't alone. That night, in a dimly lit bar in Washington, D.C., Kimberly waited. She had agreed to meet someone. The person who sent her that email. The bar was nearly empty, save for a few regulars nursing their drinks. Then, the door creaked open. A figure in a hooded sweatshirt stepped inside. Kimberly's pulse spiked as the stranger approached. Then, the hood was pulled back, and Kimberly's breath caught in her throat. It was Jennifer Reeves, her former friend, the woman who had betrayed her. And yet, here she was, alive and holding a manila envelope. Jennifer sat down, sliding the envelope across the table. "I was wrong," she whispered. Kimberly stared at her. Jennifer had been working for Alden. She had fought against Kimberly in court. And now, she was asking for forgiveness? Kimberly didn't speak. She just opened the envelope. Inside, bank statements, bribery logs, a list of names. Jennifer's voice was haunted. "Alden wasn't the real boss, Kimberly." Kimberly froze. Then who was? Jennifer's eyes flickered with fear. Someone bigger. Someone untouchable. Kimberly's stomach turned. She had spent months taking Alden down. And now Jennifer was telling her he was just a pawn. Kimberly clenched her fists. She should have known. Corruption this deep? It didn't die with one bad judge. It was systemic. And now, she had proof. Jennifer leaned closer. Oh, her voice dropped to a whisper. "There's something else." She slid her phone across the table. Kimberly picked it up, hit play. And what she heard made her blood run cold. A man's voice, low, calculated. "Alden was reckless, but it doesn't matter. She'll be gone soon." Then, a second voice. One Kimberly recognized immediately. Senator Harrington. "Good. We can't afford loose ends. She's a problem." Then, a third voice. A voice that made Kimberly physically ill. A Supreme Court justice. "She won't make it to trial." The recording ended. Kimberly's hand shook. She looked at Jennifer. "Where did you get this?" Jennifer swallowed hard. "It doesn't matter. What matters is—" But she never got to finish her sentence. Because in that moment, the window behind them exploded. Glass shattered. Kimberly and Jennifer dove for cover as a gunshot rang out. The bartender screamed. A second shot tore through the table. Kimberly reached for her phone, but Jennifer grabbed her wrist. "No cops," she hissed. Kimberly's heart pounded. "Then what do we do?" Jennifer's eyes hardened. "We run." Minutes later, Kimberly and Jennifer were speeding through the streets of D.C., headlights cutting through the dark. Jennifer's hands gripped the wheel. Kimberly checked her phone. No service. They were being jammed. Jennifer glanced at her. "There's only one place we can go." Kimberly nodded. She already knew where that was. Marcus Hale's house. When they arrived, Marcus was already waiting. He had been expecting them. Kimberly wasted no time. She laid out everything they had. The recording, the documents, the names. Marcus's face darkened. "This isn't just about Alden." Kimberly nodded. "It's about the entire system." They looked at each other. This was bigger than all of them. If they went public with this, they wouldn't just be taking down a judge. They'd be taking down the highest levels of government and the people who would do anything to stop them. Jennifer's voice was quiet. "Are we really doing this?" Kimberly met her gaze, and for the first time in months, she didn't hesitate. "Yes." Key moments. Jennifer reveals that Alden wasn't the real mastermind. A Supreme Court justice is involved in the corruption. Kimberly and Jennifer survive an assassination attempt. They go on the run, knowing that if they don't act fast, they won't live to see the truth exposed. This is it. Kimberly's last stand. They're about to expose everything. But will they survive long enough to see justice served? Let me know when you're ready for the epic conclusion. What would you do, in Kimberly's shoes? If you uncovered corruption this deep, if the highest levels of government were trying to silence you, would you run? Or would you fight? Drop a comment below and tell us, do you think Kimberly, Jennifer, and Marcus have a chance? And if you think this is the end of the fight, you're wrong. The real battle is just beginning. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because the next chapter is coming. And trust me, you won't want to miss it. The truth is dangerous, but some people are willing to risk it all. Are you ready? See you in the next episode.